Hi, I'm Akira. I've been one-tricking Inkbrush in competitive Splatoon for about 4.5 years now. In that time I've reached Div 2 Looty, got second place in many tournaments, I'll win something eventually, and I've even travelled across the country to attend an in-person LAN event called Breeze where I placed 9th. Does that make me qualified enough to make an Inkbrush guide? Maybe. I'll leave that for you to decide. But without further ado, Inkbrush is part of the roller class, or it used to be at least, and just like a roller it has 2 modes of fire. If you tap the button, the brush will flick once, dealing 30 damage, making this a 4-shot kill. The damage fall off can be a bit iffy, so don't be surprised if it ends up being a 5-shot. At max speed, this weapon can have a kill time of 24 frames, or 2/5 of a second. That may seem quick, but keep in mind that your average shooter kills in under 20 frames, making this a pretty slow kill time. Another thing to note is that the flick has a range of 10 units. You don't need to know what a units is, all you need to know is that this is the shortest range value in the game. The only weapon that comes close is the Lunar Blaster, which also has a range of 10 units, but it technically has more if you factor in its blast radius. Overall, this makes Inkbrush a pretty bad killing weapon. It needs to be in your opponent's face to kill them, and even then it does so slow enough that they can kill you before you can kill them. The flick, however, is really good at painting. Within its short range, Brush can output more paint per second than, I kid you not, 2 Splattershot Juniors. Put a brush on a zone and it is able to neutralize, if not outright capture it, better than any other weapon. But its flick is not why we're here. Inkbrush's main draw is its roll, which lets you move incredibly quickly, quicker than some weapons can swim. You have perfect ink resistance when rolling, meaning you won't get slowed down by enemy ink, nor will you take damage, and you can even roll at full speed, even on uninkable surfaces. Thanks to its roll, your plan on Inkbrush is pretty simple. You feed. Okay, well actually it's not that simple at all. The thing is that Inkbrush has great tempo thanks to its roll, and some amazing paint, but its poor range means that Brush really struggles to control space. Instead, Brush is the master of contesting space. Sure, you can't just stand there and claim that this part of the map is yours, since you have no way of enforcing that. But you're so difficult to dislodge that the enemy team has no way of doing that either. Your job as Brush is to use your roll to get into annoying parts of the map for the enemy team, and then force them to have to fight you to make progress. This is dangerous work though, and it doesn't always end in you surviving. In fact, it rarely ends in you surviving. Hence, Brush has been dubbed the feeding weapon. Both of Brush's kits have their own ways of aiding in this playstyle. The vanilla kit has Splat Bomb and Killer Whale, a really good all-round kit that has tools for any situation. The bomb is great for spamming and building your special when being locked out, and Killer Whale is an entry tool that lets you clear out parts of the map for you to move into. The Nouveau kit on the other hand has Ink Mine and Ultra Stamp. The lack of range options here means that this kit is going to struggle to get into annoying positions on its own, but the hammer's close range one-shot kill and defensive utility, at least when it works, means that this kit is able to make the most of what annoying positions it's able to get into. Despite what some tier lists may suggest, both these kits are equally as viable. They both have their strengths and weaknesses that better suit them on different maps, modes, or with different teammates or opponents. As you can tell, Inkbrush's playstyle is a bit non-standard, and the thing about non-standard playstyles like these is that they lend themselves to certain modes over others. Depending on who you ask, Inkbrush's best mode is either Splatter Zones or Clan Blitz. People who say Clan Blitz are wrong, because I'm personally of the opinion that Brush's best mode is Splatter Zones, and it isn't even close. This will be a bit of a tangent, so bear with me. As I said before, your game plan on Brush involves a lot of flanking, and the thing about flanks is that they are trade-offs. You take yourself out of the game for however many seconds, and once that time is up, you have some sort of positional advantage. Because of this, there are 2 main forms of counterplay. They can just push your team while you're effectively a player down, or, on the other hand, they can just camp your flank, taking you out of the game for even longer by killing you. But don't worry, there is counterplay to the counterplay. Counter-counterplay, if you will. If the enemy team decides to camp your flank, that is attention being taken away from your team and towards you. If 2 players go to fight you, there are effectively 2 fights happening on the map at the same time. Your team is in a 3v2, whereas you were in a 1v2. The longer you can stall out your 1v2, the more time your team gets to fight in that 3v2. Heck, even if one player goes to fight you, there's still an advantage to be gained. It can create weaknesses in the enemy team's position that your team can exploit. It can even be used to delay valuable resources, like denying certain players the ability to use their specials, lest they risk the Inkbrush breaking through. If your team is nearby, they can even just choose to shoot the people shooting at you, since they're just free kills at that point. This is the tactic people often refer to as distracting, and is the core of Brush's playstyle. The advantages gained from distracting aren't easy to quantify. Man advantage, having more players alive, is easy to quantify since there's just straight up less people shooting at you. Same with map control, you can literally see how much paint is on the ground. Distracting though doesn't add or take away enemy pressure, it only really shifts it around, which is why I think it's most effective on splat zones, because in splat zones The only thing that matters is that you paint to the square, or rectangle, or circle. Being able to shift enemy resources away from the square, rectangle, or circle by its very nature gives your team better control of the square, rectangle, or circle. If you're retaking, it means your team will meet less resistance on the zone, and if you're defending, less resources will be thrown at the zone since they'll be diverted towards you, making it easier for your team to hold. Zones is easily my favourite mode for Brush, and is the one I personally see the most success in. I usually prefer to run the Nouveau kit in zones, as it lets you double down on the distracting playstyle. Hammer is great for picking off people you're distracting, and is amazing for punishing teams that ignore you, since Hammer's poor defensive utility doesn't matter if nobody's shooting at you. Though I may switch to Vanilla if my team needs more bombs, or if it has a better matchup into the enemy team's weapon comp. While Clan Blitz is nowhere near as good as zones for Brush, it's still pretty good. Its playstyle still creates good opportunities for its team to push with by opening up the map. It can even help with extended pushes by pushing past the basket when your team is scoring. Fighting the enemy team in their spawn will keep your team safe while they're throwing clams into the basket. Brush can struggle on defense, as only Vanilla really has the tools to reliably clear out the basket, and even then they're not that effective compared to other options that other weapons have. You can however punish teams for trying to push with too few clams, as you can flank behind them and really easily cut off the opponents from the clam spawns in mid. Now, Rainmaker and Tower Control I'm going to talk about together, since I hate both these modes equally. Distracting is a pretty good tactic for letting your team push in. It can really help open up the map for your team, creating routes for them to push through and pick up kills. Brush's high tempo also means they can often get into important defensive strongholds before your opponents can. They'll have to fight you just to get into a position where they can stop the objective from moving. Brush is pretty nice on offense, but this doesn't do much to make up for Brush's absolutely atrocious defense. If you want to stop the enemy team from pushing in, distracting isn't going to do much. In Rainmaker, the enemy team can just ignore you, since all they care about is moving the Rainmaker forward. If you flank to the left side of the map, the enemy team can just take the Rainmaker to the right and gain points before you're able to catch up. In Tower Control though, it's worse. You can try to flank, but it's not as effective, since you have to get really close to the tower before you start being a threat. And even then, you have to kill the player standing on top of it, which isn't easy because Brush is not a great killing weapon, and it's made even harder by the pole on the tower that just gets in the way when trying to kill people. Now don't get me wrong, Brush is still very usable on these modes. I wouldn't be able to one-trick it if it weren't, but you might not see the same amazing results as you might expect from Splat Zones, for example. For these modes, I pretty much always default to the vanilla kit, unless I have a really good reason not to. When it comes to maps, the single most important thing to consider is how many usable flank routes there are, and the key word here is usable. Like Robo Ramen, for example, is an amazing Brush map, as the lower area provides you with multiple ways of getting into mid. You can very easily catch your opponents off guard by mixing up which routes you take into mid. Hagglefish, on the other hand, despite having two separate flank routes, may as well not have any, since both are incredibly difficult to make use of. The right side is very long and very easy to spot and punish, whereas the left side is more usable, sure, but still requires you to take a one-way drop into a heavily guarded area. Hence, Hagglefish is a bad Brush map, and I hate it with a fiery passion. Another important thing to consider is terrain. Flatter, more open maps tend to not be all too good for Brush, as longer range weapons can feel very oppressive there, and when you're playing Brush, everything is a longer ranged weapon. Maps like Hammerhead and Mincemeat are pretty miserable for this reason. Even Mahi Mahi isn't too great for Brush before the water level drops. After the water level drops, there's a bunch of terrain and it's great, but you've got to wait before it gets to that. Another thing to consider for terrain though is ledge camping, a rather overlooked strength of Brush. You're no Stamper or Carbon, your ledge camping isn't super insane, but Brush is comfortably able to splat people playing too close to ledges. And the best part is, you're under a ledge, you're not in that much danger. When possible, ledge camping is a great strategy for locking out teams in some maps. Just don't try to ledge camp slotters or blasters if they know you're there, it won't end well. Unlike a lot of other main weapons, Inkbrush is really self-sufficient. It doesn't have any horrible ink efficiency problems or accuracy problems, nor does it rely on any of its subs or specials in order to work. You have a lot of freedom when it comes to gear, so for this section I want to focus on a lot of the commonly ran abilities and talk about why you may or may not want to use them in your gear builds. And this section is going to be long, because I know for a fact that if this guide gets any traction, gear is going to be my most asked question, so I'm just knocking it out now. But before that, I'd like to thank my sponsor. But before that, I want to talk definitions, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Throughout this section, I'm going to say AP a lot, which refers to ability points, which is just how much you've invested into an ability. A main of an ability is worth 10 AP, whereas a sub is worth 3. If someone is running 19 AP of an ability, for example, it means they have a main and 3 subs. And if they're running 18 AP, it means they're just running 6 subs. With that out of the way, the first ability I want to talk about is the ability you're going to see the most on Inkbrush, Stealth Jump. And I just cannot overstate just how useful this ability is. Being able to hide your super jump marker from faraway players means that super jumping back in after death is incredibly safe and reliable. You're going to die a lot on this weapon, whether you like it or not, and so having a quick and reliable way back into the action is never going to be a bad thing. On top of that, a really underutilized but incredibly powerful tactic is super jumping to your teammates to reposition. Sometimes you're just going to find yourself in positions you really don't want to be in, either because you're in a lot of danger or because you found yourself in a useless part of the map. And so being able to safely reposition by jumping to teammates is a massive boon. Second ability is another one you're going to see on nearly every Inkbrush build again, which is Comeback, an ability exclusive to the headgear that activates every time you die. To a player, that is. No jumping into the water to activate this. When it activates for 20 seconds, you get 10 AP of Ink Saver Main, Ink Saver Sub, Ink Recovery Up, Run Speed Up, Swim Speed Up, and Special Charge. That's 60 AP worth of abilities in one single ability. And okay, sure, Brush doesn't make good use of the run speed, but that's still 50 AP of stuff all in one main slot. The main downside of this ability in theory is that you have to die to activate it, but you're doing that on Brush anyways, so this ends up just being a bunch of stats you get for most of the game pretty much for free. And speaking of dying, probably the most iconic ability on Brush is Quick Respawn. As I said before, Inkbrush's playstyle involves a lot of dying. Brush can generate a lot of value by just being in the right place at the right time, and you don't need to survive to generate this value. Quick Respawn is great for playstyles like these since the activation condition, not getting kills, is likely going to be met, which means you get to spend more time doing annoying Brush things. And I cannot stress enough that QR is an ability you can't have too much of, but you can have too little of. Quick Respawn in small amounts is basically pointless. It's only worth running if you have 18 to 19 AP. Quick Respawn is of course subject to diminishing returns like normal abilities, but don't let that put you off stacking it since it's an amazing ability in high quantities. For reference, my go-to vanilla build has 25 AP, and my go-to Nouveau build has 38. Swim speed shouldn't take much explaining. Brush can roll quickly, but swimming is still faster. The faster you swim, the faster you can get in and out of fights, the quicker you move into annoying positions. There's not much to be said, it's just a great ability to run. Or swim, I suppose. But with swim speed up out the way, let's talk about swim speed down, aka Ninja Squid. At the cost of lowering your swim speed by 10%, you get to move through ink without those pesky ripples. Being a short range weapon, Brush really likes sharking for kills. It's also just really nice against long range weapons since it lets you easily move in their line of sight while still being difficult to spot and pick off. Though the closer you get to the enemy, the easier it is for them to see you swimming and the more easily they can hear you as well. In the high levels of play, pretty much everyone there is trained to spot Ninja Squid, so you have to be careful. Now quick super jump shouldn't take too much explaining either. Quick super jump makes you jump quick. One sub can decrease the vulnerable part for your super jump animation by 22 frames, and that gets even better the more you run. It's also great for repositioning mid-game. It's so good that I've seen some Brush players go for a main and a sub's worth. The next two abilities are ones that Brush can still use to good effect, but ones I consider to be more niche for one reason or another, starting with Last Ditch Effort, which is on paper one of the most broken abilities in the game. It can give up to 18 AP of Ink Saver Main, Ink Saver Sub, and Ink Recovery Up. And that's a lot of stats, and you only get it when you need it. I say this is niche on Brush for two reasons. First is that it's only really usable on vanilla since it has a Splat Bomb, a very spammable sub, whereas Nouveau has Ink Mine, which isn't something you want to be spamming. On top of that, the Brush main weapon itself has really good ink efficiency, so the main saver almost has no value. The second reason though is that it competes for a slot with Comeback, which also provides a lot of useful stats, but pairs perfectly with the playstyle of both brushes. You can run it if you want to, but probably only on vanilla Brush on more lockout heavy maps, like Brinewater. Even then, I'd still run Comeback. Now we're on the value subs part of this section, because I don't think Brush needs most of them, and we're starting with Inkres, which is one of the more useless value subs for obvious reasons. The role already has like infinite Inkres built in already. You do see the odd Brush here and there running it, but most tend not to. Now onto Special Saver, which is a very universal value sub. It saves 9% of your special every time you die. Very cool. You can run it on Brush if you want to, but the reason why I say it's niche is because Brush's playstyle focuses a lot on its main weapon and what that allows you to do. The two specials Brush is stuck with right now are both pretty weak, and so it's hard to justify investing into either of them. I personally think that in most cases, that sub could be used better elsewhere, like on Quick Respawn. Bomb Defense is another one you see everywhere and with good reason. One sub can mess with a lot of damage combos that rely on a bomb dealing 30 damage. Slosh's damage combo for example. If you think you need the value it provides as Brush, then go for it. Add it to your build. But the reason why I'm saying it's niche, despite it being really good, is again for two reasons. First is, sure, you get to survive a bunch of different combos, but after that, you're at less than 1 HP, so much as a slight breeze will kill you. After you survive that combo, you need to run as fast as you can to somewhere safe so you can recover HP. You'd think Brush would be able to do that with all its mobility, but with the positions Brush tends to find itself in, it's not a guarantee that there's going to be somewhere safe to run to before you get killed. Like, sure, you survive the damage combo, but do you survive what comes after, or are you just unnecessarily delaying your death? The second reason is pretty simple though, and it's what I said with quick respawn. Brush doesn't really need to survive in order to do its job. As a Brush, you can run in, generate value for your team, and then die to a slosher combo, and that is fine. You've done your job, it's now on the rest of your team to capitalise on it. So this one sub, in my opinion, is better used elsewhere, like on quick respawn. Now the final ability I want to mention is a vanilla Inkbrush specific one, which is Special Power. The Special Power up curve for Killer Whale is surprisingly good. It can make your Killer Whales have a lot more value. The effect really starts being noticeable at 2 subs, where it extends the duration by 0.4 seconds. And it continues to scale well up until about 12 to 13 AP, where it gets an extra 0.6 seconds. If you want to focus on spamming bombs and using your whale, I would highly recommend Special Power. But if you're going for a more feeder playstyle, then this ability isn't worth considering in my opinion. It's one of those where it's really good if you want it, but you have to want it. And if you don't, you may as well run more quick respawn. While this guide is about Brush, Brush doesn't exist in a vacuum. You have 3 other players on your team, and the performance of your Brush and how you want to play it in the first place depends on what the other 3 players are playing. And so this section will cover the main weapons I like to pair with Brush, as well as some rants about noteworthy specials sprinkled in. Starting with short-range shooters. Short-range shooters like Splashomatic and Splattershot are famed for their splash ability. They have strong paint, strong kits, and are very self-sufficient. There's always going to be a shooter that fills in a role you need, be it cooler spammer, anchor options, or reef slider cheese if that's what you're into. There is also some synergy between Brush and these shooters. Brush almost necessitates fast movement and high tempo from its team. The opportunities Brush creates can be fleeting and need to be acted upon quickly. Short range shooters have great frame data letting them do exactly that. The main downside of shooters is that they need line of sight. It's not uncommon for a Brush to be fighting someone behind a box or a wall or around a corner, and that can be a big problem for shooters since they can't help immediately. Plus, repositioning like that can mean abandoning an otherwise strong position, or it could put themselves in needless danger. Even still, you can't go wrong with putting shooters on a team. Just like shooters, dualies are great thanks to their good paint and good mobility, and just like shooters, they're held back by their need for line of sight, though this is ameliorated by their roles, letting them quickly move from behind cover. On top of that, they also have really good kill potential, which is a really nice quality to have on a weapon pairing with Brush. The most iconic dually to pair with Brush is the Tetra dualies. They work perfectly together and is a frontline call that has been getting results ever since Splatoon 2. I also want to make note of the vanilla dualies in particular, since they come with Crab. Not only is Crab a consistently top tier special, in my eyes Crab is one of the best specials to pair with Inkbrush. It can serve both as an entry tool and an anchor. Now the anchor role is something that pretty much every team needs filled in some way. Most teams tend to do this by having a dedicated anchor weapon, something like a charger or a long range splatling. And don't get me wrong, Brush can play with these weapons decently well, as I'll get to later. But they're slow and require that pesky line of sight again, so they're not perfect. By outsourcing your anchor role to a Crab, your team is free to pick better, more synergistic main weapons with Brush without necessarily murdering your comp. It lets you have a fast-paced, more aggressive team that can still switch to defense when it needs to. Now, Tent Umbrella is another Brush pairing that is as old as time. In fact, fun Akira lore for you, the initial spark that got me playing Brush in the first place was a top-level Japanese tournament set that included a team using double Brush and Tent, and this was back in 2019. If Future Me remembers, there will be a link to that in the description. As I said before, Brush struggles to get in due to both its poor range and its kit's not really doing much to help with that. And so having a weapon on your team whose entire gimmick is creating a deployable shield that you can use as cover to get you in kind of makes sense. In the worst case scenario, the enemy team will just bomb the shield to all hell. And even still, that's good, because that gives you a distraction that lets you get in. And so you know how I keep complaining about line of sight? Well, sloshers don't need that. Sloshers are genuinely insane weapons to play with Brush. Their ability to hit players from behind blocks or under ledges means that no matter where the Brush is fighting from, a slosher is able to help, regardless of terrain separating them. Genuinely love playing Brush with all the sloshers as well, and that does include Explo. I'm not sure if that includes Blob, actually, but Explo's definitely included. Now, Squeezer, Nort, and Heavy Edit are also weapons worth mentioning, as they fill in the midline shred you to pieces role. These 3 weapons are able to eviscerate basically anybody they set their eyes upon. The main downside being that they struggle to move forward on their own. Brush is able to use its distractions to safely open up parts of the map, letting these weapons safely move forward and get in range. Additionally, distracted players make for very easy pickings. One thing you gotta remember when playing these weapons though is that you're not really the win con, they are. Your job is to set them up to carry, and okay, that's true in pretty much any team with a brush, but it is especially true when playing with these weapons. Now, if you're going to run a backline weapon in a brush comp, I personally think that ballpoint is your best option. As I mentioned earlier when talking about Crab, backlines are kind of iffy. They tend to be pretty slow and struggle to help brush as it moves around the map. Ballpoint short range mode though gives it the paint and mobility of a mini Splatling, except for whatever reason it's able to kill one frame quicker. It gives it the mobility and firepower of the short range weapons, and it's able to keep up with brush while still having the ability to pull back and play anchor when the time calls. Other long range Splatlings, while not as perfect as ballpoint, do still make for some good pairings, since they can still fight decently well and have better mobility compared to your other long range weapons. Now, given the amount I seem to bang on about line of sight, you'd think I would have included some other blasters in this list, but unfortunately they struggle to work well with brush. Blaster just isn't what brush wants in a teammate, and brush isn't what blaster wants in a teammate. Rapid Blaster and its pro variant, though, differ a bit. Their strength is their ability to safely harass the enemy team's backline, as well as flush out enemies from behind cover and around corners, both of which serve to help Brush move up and safely get into those annoying positions. Pencil strengths are similar to the strength of Heavy Edit, roll consolidation. It takes up the mantle of both Cooler Spammer and Anchor, freeing up your two other player slots to be whatever you want them to be, ideally two other frontliners. You don't have any special damage combos with it or anything, but so long as Cooler is turbo meta, Pencil will always be a good pairing for Brush. With the advent of Cooler meta, something I hear quite often is that Cooler has pushed Brush out of the meta. That everyone can do Brush's job now, or that everyone is able to keep up, and I personally don't agree with this. Cooler on the enemy team is kind of iffy, sure. Everyone having max swim speed, quick respawn and special saver definitely makes it harder for Brush to do its job. But this fails to recognise that Brush is also a beneficiary of Cooler meta. Brush really likes the full swim speed, the QR and the special saver that Cooler gives. On top of that, your teammates getting movement speed and accuracy buffs from Cooler only makes them more mobile and more efficient slayers. Tacticaler makes Brush's teammates better at being Brush teammates. If in some faraway future Tacticaler gets nerfed to the point of being actually balanced for once, I don't think Cooler would be optimal for Brush, but still pretty good. But right now, as it stands, Cooler is turbo meta, and so long as Cooler is turbo meta, it's actually really freaking good for Brush and you should run it. This list is by no means exhaustive, and I don't really want to go through every single weapon in the game, so I'm going to give you a quick rule of thumb. Generally, the main thing I'm looking for in a weapon is activity. The more active a weapon can be on the map, the better. The more able it is to push up and take fights, the better. As an example, if you're desperate for a big bubbler weapon in your team comp, I would much prefer a Zinc Mini Splatling over a Splattershot Jr. Reason being, the Mini Splatling is a whole lot more willing and able to follow up on Brush's plays and clear up weakened opponents. Compared to a lot of other weapons, Brush isn't that mechanically difficult. You don't need to know about any special interactions, and you don't even need to aim all that well. The only thing that can really hold you back when playing Brush is the button mashing. If you struggle to button mash, there are ways you can try and get around that. Now, while I'd love for Nintendo to add some sort of rapid fire button option, we don't have that yet. So our next best thing is to use the button mappings. While I don't do this personally, I know that some Brush players use either the L button or some of the buttons on the D-pad to help them with their button mashing, where they can alternate between pressing ZR and one of those buttons to flick Brush as fast as they can. If you talk to button mash, this is an option that can hopefully, maybe, potentially make it easier. Again, I kind of wish Nintendo would give us some auto-click option, but on a second note, button mashing for too long is a surefire way of giving yourself an RSI. If you could button mash before, you certainly won't be able to afterwards. So please, for the love of God, take breaks. Even if all you're doing is putting your controller down between games, waiting for the match to start, please. The last thing you want is to injure yourself and then not be able to play Brush anymore. But that about covers all I wanted to say, so thank you for getting this far. Or skipping to the end. I mean, either way it counts as a view, so I'll take it. This has been in the works for a while, and took an ungodly amount of work. Plus, the reveal of Side Order's release date meant I had to work overtime if I wanted this out during the Side Order hype. So if you learnt literally anything from this, a like would be much appreciated. Please, please, engage with the video. I want engagement. If you want to see more Brush stuff, Check the description again, because future me should leave links to the YouTube channels and Twitch channels of some Western and Japanese brush players who are better than me. You'd probably learn more from watching them than you could from watching me. That is until I surpass them in skill and become the ultimate brush player. If you want to see more brush stuff from me, then you should probably subscribe, since there were things I wanted to add to this guide but ended up having to cut. Things that could be their own standalone idea. But with that, thank you again for getting this far. It means quite a lot to me. I hope to see you in the next one, and pasta la vista.